Livingstone's letter bag. Selecting 20 of the strongest and faithfulest men, I despatched them back to Unyanyembe in search of the missing men, and Selim was sent to Sheikh bin Nasib to borrow or buy a long slave chain. Towards night my 20 detectives returned with 9 of the missing men. The Wajiji had deserted in a body, and they could not be found. Selim also returned with a strong chain, capable of imprisoning within the collars attached to it at least 10 men. Kaif Halek also appeared, with the letter bag which he was to convey to Livingstone under my escort. The men were then addressed, and the slave chain exhibited to them. I told them that I was the first white man who had taken a slave chain with him on his travels, but as they were all so frightened of accompanying me, I was obliged to make use of it, as it was the only means of keeping them together. The good need never fear being chained by me, only the deserters, the thieves who received their hire and presents, guns and ammunition, and then ran away. I would not put anyone this time in chains, but whoever deserted after this day I should halt and not continue the march till I found him, after which he should march to Ujiji with the slave chain round his neck. Do you hear? Yes, was the answer. Do you understand? Yes. We broke up camp at 6 p.m. and took the road for Inasuka, at which place we arrived at 8 p.m. When we were about commencing the march the next morning, it was discovered that 2 more had deserted. Baraka and Bombay were at once dispatched to Unyanyembe to bring back the 2 missing men, Asmani and Kingaru, with orders not to return without them. This was the 3rd time that the latter had deserted, as the reader may remember. While the pursuit was being effected, we halted at the village of Inasuka, more for the sake of Shaw than anyone else. In the evening the incorrigible deserters were brought back, and, as I had threatened, were well flogged and chained, to secure them against further temptation. Bombay and Baraka had a picturesque story to relate of the capture, and as I was in an exceedingly good humour, their services were rewarded with a fine cloth each. On the following morning another carrier had absconded, taking with him his hire of 15 new cloths and a gun, but to halt anywhere near Unyanyembe any longer was a danger that could be avoided only by travelling without stoppages towards the southern jungle lands. It will be remembered that I had in my train the redoubtable Abdul Kader the tailor, he who had started from Bagamoyo with such bright anticipations of the wealth of ivory to be obtained in the great interior of Africa. On this morning, daunted by the reports of the dangers ahead, Abdul Kader craved to be discharged. He vowed he was sick and unable to proceed any further. As I was pretty well tired of him, I paid him off in cloth, and permitted him to go. About half way to Kasagera, Mabruk Salim was suddenly taken sick. I treated him with a grain of calomel and a couple of ounces of brandy. As he was unable to walk, I furnished him with a donkey. Another man named Zaidi was ill with rheumatic fever, and Shaw tumbled twice off the animal he was riding, and required an infinite amount of coaxing to mount again. Verily my expedition was pursued by adverse fortunes, and it seemed as if the fates had determined upon our return. It really appeared as if everything was going to wreck and ruin. If I were only 15 days from Unyanyembe, thought I should be saved. Kasagera was the scene of rejoicing the afternoon and evening of our arrival. Absentees had just returned from the coast, and the youths were brave in their gaudy bedizenment. Their new barsatis, their suharis, and long cloths of bright new kaniki, with which they had adorned themselves behind some bush before they had suddenly appeared dressed in all this finery. The women high-hied like maenads, and the lulu-luing was loud, frequent, and fervent the whole of that afternoon. Sylph-like damsels looked up to the youthful heroes with intensest admiration on their features. Old women coddled and fondled them. Staff-using, stooping-backed patriarchs blessed them. This is fame in Unyamwezi. All the fortunate youths had to use their tongues until the wee hours of next morning had arrived, relating all the wonders they had seen near the Great Sea and in the Unguja, the island of Zanzibar, of how they saw great white men's ships and numbers of white men, of their perils and trials during their journey through the land of the fierce Wagogo, and divers other facts with which the reader and I are by this time well acquainted. On the 24th we struck camp, and marched through a forest of imbiti wood in a south-south-west direction, and in about 3 hours came to Kigandu. On arriving before this village, which is governed by a daughter of Mkasiwa, we were informed we could not enter unless we paid toll. As we would not pay toll, we were compelled to camp in a ruined, rat-infested boma, situated a mile to the left of Kigandu, being well scolded by the cowardly natives for deserting Mkasiwa in his hour of extremity. We were accused of running away from the war. Almost on the threshold of our camp, Shaw, in endeavouring to dismount, lost his stirrups and fell prone on his face. The foolish fellow actually laid on the ground in the hot sun a full hour, and when I coldly asked him if he did not feel rather uncomfortable, he sat up and wept like a child. "Do you wish to go back, Mr. Shaw?" "If you please. I do not believe I can go any further, and if you would only be kind enough, I should like to return very much." "Well, Mr. Shaw, I have come to the conclusion that it is best you should return. My patience is worn out. I have endeavoured faithfully to lift you above these petty miseries which you nourish so devotedly. You are simply suffering from hypochondria. You imagine yourself sick, and nothing evidently will persuade you that you are not. Mark my words, to return to Unyanyembe is to die. Should you happen to fall sick in Kwihara, who knows how to administer medicine to you? Supposing you are delirious, how can any of the soldiers know what you want, or what is beneficial and necessary for you? Once again I repeat, if you return, you die." "Oh dear me, I wish I had never ventured to come. I thought life in Africa was so different from this. I would rather go back, if you will permit me." The next day was a halt, and arrangements were made for the transportation of Shaw back to Kwihara. A strong litter was made, and 4 stout pagazis were hired at Kigandu to carry him. Bread was baked, a canteen filled with cold tea, and a leg of a kid was roasted for his sustenance while on the road. The night before we parted we spent together. Shaw played some tunes on an accordion which I had purchased for him at Zanzibar, but though it was only a miserable $10 affair, I thought the homely tunes evoked from the instrument that night were divine melodies. The last tune played before retiring was Home Sweet Home. The morning of the 27th we were all up early. There was considerable viz in our movements. A long, long march lay before us that day, but then I was to leave behind all the sick and ailing. Only those who were healthy and could march fast and long were to accompany me. Mabruk Salim I left in charge of a native doctor, who was to medicate him for a gift of cloth which I gave him in advance. The horn sounded to get ready. Shaw was lifted in his litter on the shoulders of his carriers. My men formed 2 ranks, the flags were lifted, and between these 2 living rows, and under those bright streamers, which were to float over the waters of the Tanganika before he should see them again, Shaw was borne away towards the north, while we filed off to the south with quicker and more elastic steps, as if we felt an incubus had been taken from us. We ascended a ridge bristling with syenite boulders of massive size, appearing above a forest of dwarf trees. The view which we saw was similar to that we had often seen elsewhere, an illimitable forest stretching in grand waves far beyond the ken of vision. Ridges, forest clad, rising gently one above another until they receded in the dim purple-blue distance, with a warm haze floating above them, which, though clear enough in our neighbourhood, became impenetrably blue in the far distance. Woods, 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 leafy branches, foliage globes or parachutes, green, brown, or sere in colour, forests one above another, rising, falling, and receding, a very leafy ocean. The horizon at all points presents the same view. There may be an indistinct outline of a hill far away,